When I was a kid, my parents used to leave me home alone sometimes. Both of my parents worked, and they stopped getting a babysitter for me when I was around 10. I'm an only child, so I got used to being home alone pretty quickly. I was able to make several foods for myself and have snacks, but most of the time, I would just sit and watch TV or hang out in my room. The house that we lived in was one level and had a basement as well. There were 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms on the main floor, as well as the living room and kitchen. It wasn't a very big house, but it also was not tiny, and it never felt like we didn't have enough space. At the time of this story, I was probably about 12 years old. So, one night, I was home by myself. I really don't remember where exactly my parents were that night, but they were both gone. My mom had cooked me some food before they left, so I had it while watching TV in the living room. Then I went into my bedroom afterwards. For the next hour or so, I just kind of hung out in there playing on my Nintendo DS and watching the smaller TV that was in my bedroom. It was probably like 8:30 or 9 p.m. at this point, and it was completely dark outside. That's when I heard our sliding glass door opening. I was used to hearing that noise because my parents went in and out to the patio all the time. The sliding glass door was connected to the dining room area by the kitchen, and it was at the back corner of the house. We had a little patio with a table and a grill and stuff like that. It was like 5 seconds after I heard this noise that I realized it was strange. None of my parents were home, so who could have done that? We didn't have any neighbors who would just come over or anything like that, and I suddenly became very worried very quickly. I started to panic, and I didn't know what to do. This kind of a situation had never happened to me before, and in fact, I had never really thought about it being a possibility. The neighborhood was always quiet and calm, and it seemed just like any other to me. I tried thinking quickly of who would be there, but I couldn't think of anybody. My bedroom door was not completely closed either, but open about a foot. I thought about getting up and closing it, but I didn't want to make any noise, so I stayed where I was, sitting on top of my bed. One thing I noticed though, was that I didn't hear anybody walking around inside the house. And we had wood floors in the living room and dining room, so I probably would have heard whoever was there walking. My TV was playing with the volume pretty low, so I knew I would have heard the footsteps. I sat there on my bed, not moving, listening closely for any noise, but I didn't hear anything. After a few moments, I grabbed my TV remote, which was next to me, and turned the volume all the way down. I listened very closely for probably another 30 seconds to a minute. I still heard nothing. I wondered if I actually had heard the sliding door closed. I definitely had. This was really strange, but after not hearing anything for a while longer, I started to feel better. I was convincing myself that nothing was wrong. Soon, I decided that I would have a look for myself. I got up from my bed and walked over to the doorway. My bedroom led into the hallway, and to the right was the living room. The dining room and kitchen were not in view from the hallway. You had to walk through the living room and then take a right to get to it. After looking around in the living room and seeing nothing, I stepped out. I walked through the living room and then to the dining room and kitchen. Still, I didn't see or hear anybody. This made me think that nobody was there. When I looked to the sliding glass door, it was closed but not locked. Now, this was a little bit concerning, but nobody seemed to be inside the house. Possibly a neighbor saw that it was open and closed it or something. That was bizarre, but that was the thought that came to my head. I don't know why. I tried thinking if the door had been open or closed when I had been out in the living room and kitchen before. I couldn't remember though. To be honest, most of the time, I wouldn't even notice. Maybe one of my parents had forgot to close it or lock it. I walked over to the door and then I locked it. Then I looked around into the patio and backyard. Our yard was pretty small, but we did have a bit of grass and a few plants and trees. Everything seemed fine from what I could see, and after that I walked back over to my bedroom. I really didn't know how to explain the bizarre sound that I heard, but I guessed that it could be nothing. After returning to my bedroom though, I decided to look outside to my backyard from my bedroom window. I usually had the window covered with blinds, as it was on this night. I lifted them up and looked out. Everything seemed fine from what I could see. About right after this, I returned to my bed, but was thirsty, and my water glass was empty, so I picked it up and headed to the kitchen to get a refill. After I walked to the fridge, I was filling my glass when I heard another sound. It was coming from the living room. Somebody was definitely in there, and I started to hear footsteps. The closest exit that I was near was the sliding glass door, and I sprinted for it right away. I unlocked it, opened the door, and ran out without even closing it behind me. I was probably the scaredest I had ever been. I didn't see whoever was there at all, but I knew somebody was inside the house. When I got outside, I sprinted out of the yard and around the house to the street. Then I started running down the street, just trying to get as far away from my house as I could. I'm not really sure where I was planning to go, but as long as I was away from my house, I felt safe. Luckily, at this time I had recently gotten my first cell phone. I had it with me in my pocket, and I took it out and called my mom. When I told her what had happened, she said that she was calling the police, and my parents would head home immediately. I'm pretty sure in the meantime, I just kind of walked around the streets of my neighborhood. Eventually, I got another call from my mom, asking where I was, and when I told her, her and my dad were there within a minute or two to pick me up. I got inside their car, and we drove to our house, which had several police cars in front of it now. I waited in the car with my mom as my dad talked to the officers to know the situation. When he came back, he said that the guy who had been inside the house was gone. The police hadn't found anybody inside. However, the house had several things in it that were messed up. One of the blankets that was on the couch was now on the floor, and I hadn't put it there. The doors to my parents' bedroom and the basement were also left open and had been closed before. But surprisingly, nothing was stolen from the house at all. We all went back inside a short time later, and I was pretty scared for the rest of the night. The guy never came back though, and I never saw him again. I'm just glad that I left when I did and got out of there. Something weird happened to me last week. I was having a movie night by myself in my apartment. I live alone and on the second floor. My apartment building is fairly new, and I really like it. The place I live in has one bedroom, one bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. I was on my second movie of the night, and the time was about midnight. It was Saturday, so I didn't have work or anything the next morning. My apartment happened to be on the far end of the hallway, and it was right next to the stairs that people would occasionally use. The elevator was in the center of the hallway, which is much more common for people to use. I heard the door to the stairs open and then close. It sounded like somebody was walking by down the hallway, and I didn't think anything of it, but I realized soon that it sounded like more than one person, maybe almost 10. I thought it was a little weird, but expected them all to pass by. It seemed like they all stopped right outside of my doorway though. Maybe they were going to the place across the hall from me. The apartment across the hall though was not lined up with my door, but was a little ways down. I just got curious for some reason, so I paused the movie and got up. I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. What I saw shocked me. There was like 10 guys standing in the hallway right outside my apartment, and they were all facing my door. I was instantly creeped out. I didn't know who any of these guys were, and they were all wearing all black and had hoods on, so I couldn't see much of their faces. This was really bizarre, to say the least. Nobody had knocked on my door though, and it didn't seem as though they were going to. They were just standing there. I considered for only a second opening the door and asking what was going on, but I thought better of it. I quickly walked away and decided to just ignore them. Still, I couldn't feel comfortable as long as they were all standing there. I was hoping and sort of expecting them all to move along and to keep walking away down the hallway. I listened for them to move away, but they didn't. I waited for a little longer before unpausing the movie, but I still didn't hear them walking away. The guys had to all still be there. I tried to distract myself by watching the film, but in doing so, I turned the volume down significantly. I didn't want the people outside to hear or know that I was home. As the movie played though, I still couldn't focus. It wasn't helping to distract me from the strange men standing outside my door. Then, I heard what I was sure sounded like my doorknob turning. It was very quiet, and the only reason I had heard it was because number one, I was already thinking about the guys at the door, and number two, my TV volume was now very quiet. This made me feel really creeped out, even more than I already was. I also started to feel like possibly I was in danger. I stayed where I was, not sure of what to do. For the next probably 10 minutes, I didn't hear any other noises or anything. I got up to see if the men were gone, and I was really hoping that they were. When I got to the door and looked out though, they were all still there. I ran back as quietly as possible. I sat back down on my couch and had no clue what to do in this situation. I didn't think I could call the police for this. They were just standing in my hallway. Yes, I thought they tried opening my door, but it's not like they were trying over and over or banging on the door. Looking back, I probably should have, but I was just hoping I wouldn't have to. After maybe 5 more minutes or so, I went back to look again. This time, when I looked out, they were all gone. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even heard them walking away or anything. I was so paranoid that I kept looking back out my peephole every 10 minutes or so. Luckily, I didn't see them. But before going to bed, I was so worried about it that I left my apartment and walked the hallways, just making sure that the men were gone. I went throughout the whole entire building just about without seeing them. After that, I was finally able to go to bed. By now, it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was really tired. I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, at some point, I was woken up in the night. I just remember waking up to the sounds of somebody knocking on my front door. They knocked about 2 times after I woke up. I knew it was probably the same guys, and I was terrified. I stayed in my bed and didn't even bother to get up. What could I do? Then, there was just silence. I was afraid they would break in or something. I couldn't believe that they were back, if that's in fact who was at the door. I really didn't want to get up and check though. I laid there in my bed for the longest time. It was probably about 30 minutes or so. I finally looked at the clock and saw that it was almost 4 a.m. Then I got up and checked the door. Nobody was outside in the hallway though. Whoever had knocked was gone. I went back to sleep after that and heard nothing more. Since then, everything's been fine. This happened when I was a kid. Ironically, it was the first time I was ever left home alone. I remember the year was 2006. I lived with my parents and older sister. Our house was in a pretty normal neighborhood. There were a bunch of houses on our street, and the yards were decent sized but not that big. The street was usually pretty quiet. Mostly only people who lived there would drive down. On this night, my sister was at her best friend's house, and my parents were going to a movie with friends. I didn't have anything going on, so I was left home alone. Normally, my older sister would be left home with me, but not tonight. I was a little bit nervous, to be honest, because I was afraid of the basement and really shy in general, but overall, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. My parents were only going to be gone for maybe 3 hours. Our house was pretty average, and I planned to just hang out in the living room the whole time. When my parents left, everything went well for the first hour or so. I was sitting on the couch, channel surfing, when there was a knock at the front door suddenly. Instantly, my heart started pounding. I would never answer the door by myself, and I didn't know who could be there. Also, it was like 8 o'clock at night and dark out. I stayed where I was, and after a 10-second pause or so, whoever was there knocked again. I was too scared to even get up and look out the window to see who was there. Our blinds were all closed in the living room, which I had done myself after my parents left. This is the exact kind of situation that I was afraid of. The person knocked again. They seemed like they really wanted somebody to answer the door. I just wanted them to leave though. After knocking one more time, finally it seemed to stop for good. I was glad that they stopped, and now finally I decided to go look out the window. I got up and looked out, but saw nobody there. The front step as well as the driveway were empty, and I didn't see anybody in the street either. I felt a little better after this, and then returned to what I was doing. I had no idea who had been knocking or why, but all that mattered to me was that they were now gone. For the next 20 minutes or so, I stayed in the living room on the couch. Then I heard what sounded like something hitting up against the back window of the house. It seemed weird to me. I heard the noise for probably like 30 seconds. I decided to get up and see what it was. When I walked over to the kitchen, I saw the window where the noise was coming from, and at first saw nothing. Then, when I got closer, I saw there was a man right on the other side in our backyard. I turned on the light, and the guy ducked down out of my view. I ran away after I saw him. I went all the way to my bedroom and got into my bed. When I got there, I covered myself with blankets and plugged my ears. I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't want to know what was happening. I remained there for probably another hour, too scared to move. I didn't hear anything and didn't allow myself to hear anything either. For all I knew, our house could be getting robbed. Finally, when I was able to feel well enough to take the blankets off, everything seemed fine. I didn't hear anything from inside the house. Just minutes later, my parents got home. When they were inside, I went to see them. Everything in the house was fine, and there was no sign of the man anywhere. The windows he had been at were still closed and not broken or anything. I told my parents about it, and they checked all around the house, as well as outside. There was no sign of the guy, though. I'm guessing that after the man saw me, he ran away and didn't come back. I think he was trying to break in, though. Quite possibly, he knocked to see if anybody was home, and when there was no answer, he figured the house was empty. After this experience, I didn't want to stay home by myself for a long time. I live with a roommate, and this is something that happened not too long ago. We live in a smaller house, pretty close to the city. The rent is cheap, and up until the point of this story, everything had gone really well. My roommate's name is Matt, and we get along good, but I would not call us best friends. We have different work schedules as well, so sometimes we don't really see each other for a few days. So a couple of months ago, I got home from work one night. It was probably like 6 p.m. or so. And when I got inside the house, I first went to the kitchen to get something to drink. When I was leaving the kitchen and going into the living room, I saw that the back door to the house was left open. I don't mean left open as in unlocked, but literally left open. I walked over and shut it and figured that Matt had left it open. Both Matt and I were a little bit sloppy sometimes here and there, but between the two of us, this is something that he might do. I shut the door and locked it and just shook my head. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom. I was there for probably 30 minutes before hearing the sound of someone walking up the stairs. I was 100% sure that it was Matt. I never even considered the possibility that somebody else could have been inside. Matt, or at least who I thought was Matt, got to the top of the stairs and began walking down the hallway. After he walked past my bedroom door, which was closed, I yelled to him. I said, "Matt." I didn't immediately get a response. Then I said to him, "You left the back door open." Still, he didn't say anything back to me. This was a little strange because I knew that he had heard me. It seemed like he had either gone to the bathroom, the spare bedroom, or most likely his bedroom. I walked over and opened up my door. When I did, I didn't see Matt, but instead, a different man. This guy had longer blonde hair, a slight reddish beard, and was tall and thin. He looked over at me, and as soon as he did, I made a run for the stairs. To my surprise, the guy started running after me. This made me panic, and after getting downstairs, I didn't feel like I could get to the front or back door quick enough. I would have to stop, unlock it, and then open it. Instead, in a split-second decision, I chose to run down into the basement. I know how dumb this sounded looking back, but in a moment of panic, this is what I chose. The basement door was right by the bottom of the stairs, and already open a little. The guy was running behind me at probably 20 feet back or so. When I was running to the basement stairs, I could see that it was pitch black down there. Our basement was unfinished. All that we really had down there was our washer and dryer, and aside from that, there were just random pipes and beams. There was also a few storage containers and boxes. Not very many, though. I didn't bother to turn on the light, and when I got downstairs, I immediately went to the left. Then, I went behind the stairs, which I felt like was my best hiding spot. There was literally no visibility down there at all. I heard the guy running down the stairs, and he got down shortly after I had got behind the stairs. After he got down there, I heard him walking around. He didn't say anything, and I didn't know what he was capable of. The man then pushed over one of the boxes. He was definitely looking for me, but for what reason, I didn't know. When it sounded like he had walked further away, I thought about leaving my hiding spot. However, I guess I chickened out, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. The area I was hiding in was a pretty good spot, to be honest, and was not that obvious if you had never been in the basement before. I was just hoping that the guy wouldn't decide to look back here. He kept walking around, and at one point walked pretty close to me, but he didn't look to where I was somehow. He stayed down there for probably 10 or 15 minutes. Finally, he went back upstairs. When he did that, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I felt relieved that he was gone, but if I decided to go upstairs, I was worried that he would be right there waiting for me. Luckily, I had my phone on me. This was the first time that I thought to call the police, or really even had the opportunity to. I dialed 911, but tried to be as quiet as possible. It was really silent down there, and I didn't want the guy to hear me wherever he was. When the operator answered, I told them some guy was in my house, chasing me around, and I was told the police would be there shortly. I hung up after that, not to make too much noise. I didn't move from my hiding place. About 10 minutes went by. I was feeling better until I heard the basement door open again. The guy then walked back down into the basement again.
He was walking very slowly and was only down there for like a minute. Then he started to walk upstairs again. I didn't know what was going on, but luckily there was a knock on the door after that. It had to be the police. I heard the guy running through the house. I got out from where I was and I ran back upstairs to let the police in. Sure enough, it was them, and I heard the guy leaving out the back door when I got to the top of the stairs. I told the police the guy was running away, and they were able to track him down a short time later. The guy had in fact entered through the back door after Matt had left it unlocked. I didn't know what he wanted though. He seemed to be after me for some reason. I'm hoping that I never see the guy again. I'm also hoping that Matt never leaves the back door unlocked again.
This happened when I was younger. I think it was either my last year of middle school or my freshman year of high school. When I was a kid, my parents divorced, and I lived with my mom most of the time. Occasionally, I would go up and stay at my dad's place for a weekend, but usually I was just at my mom's. I have an older brother who's like 5 years older than me, and he was now in college at the time of the story. So most of the time, it was just my mom and I inside our house. We lived in a smaller place, with a few bedrooms upstairs, and the regular kitchen, living room, and bathroom downstairs. On the night of this story, my mom had to work at night, which she would have to do occasionally. This meant that I would be home all by myself, at least until she got off of work. I think she got off at like 9 that night, and at about 7 p.m., I was home alone and got bored. My best friend was a kid named Brian, who lived in the same neighborhood. He actually lived just down the street, but our street was really long, and it took like 5 minutes to walk from his place to mine. I Snapchatted Brian and asked him if he wanted to come over and hang out. I didn't bother to ask my mom if I could have him over because I figured she wouldn't care. Brian wasn't really doing anything either at the time, and he agreed. Normally, when Brian and I hung out, we would just game. I told Brian that I would leave the back door unlocked for him and to come right in. Then I went downstairs, unlocked the back door for Brian, and turned the light on next to it as well. Then I went back upstairs to my bedroom and started up my PlayStation. A few minutes went by, and I started playing a warm-up game of Call of Duty, waiting for Brian. Then, maybe minutes later, I heard the back door open, then close. I kept playing, and didn't really bat an eye. Brian knew where my bedroom was, and I expected him to be up shortly. I kept focusing on my game, and got a little bit carried away because like 5 minutes went by, and Brian still wasn't at my room yet. That's when I realized it was strange. I got up and walked over to my doorway. I yelled out, "Brian?" There was no answer. I headed downstairs to see what Brian was doing. Right when I got down the stairs and was at the bottom of them though, I saw somebody. It was a grown man who I had never seen before in my life. He was standing at the other end of the room and wasn't looking at me. I couldn't believe it. I quickly ran in the opposite direction, but then I heard the man start to move. I ducked down and hid behind the couch. Then I heard the man start walking. The guy also sounded like he was very quietly talking to himself. I couldn't make out what he was saying though. It sounded like he was rambling. I was on my hands and knees, crouched down between the wall and the couch. The guy walked over into my direction, but seemed to go past me towards the stairs. Then I heard him walking up them. When he reached the top, I used this opportunity to get up and run for the door. I exited the front door just in time to see Brian walking up the driveway. He saw me leaving the house and I ran over to him. Brian looked really confused when he saw the look of panic on my face. I told him there was a man in the house and we had to get out of there. We both ran back to Brian's house down the street. Luckily, his parents were home, so when we got inside, we felt much safer. The police were called, and Brian and I stayed at his house. After like an hour, a police officer showed up at Brian's house. He told us that they had caught a man inside my house upstairs in my bedroom. My mom heard about it and left work 30 minutes early. She picked me up from Brian's and we went back to our house. Everything was mostly still in place. Still, I couldn't believe they had found the guy inside my bedroom. I'm so glad I left when I did and the guy didn't see me hiding from him. I learned a valuable lesson from this, not to leave any doors unlocked. I'm always very careful about it, still to this day. This happened when I was home alone as a kid. It was the summertime, and I was home during summer break. Both of my parents were at work, and I think I was about 12 years old. I have an older brother, and he went to one of his friends' houses that day.
When I was home alone, I would just hang out and do whatever. Usually, I would go on the computer that we had and play Minecraft or something like that. It was probably sometime in the early afternoon, and I had been on the computer in the living room for a while. I moved into the kitchen to get something to eat. The kitchen was at the back side of the house, and we lived in a split level. I will also mention that the neighborhood was pretty average and a little bit on the quieter side. It was when I was standing in the kitchen that I saw something out the window. I just barely saw movement at first, but it looked like somebody was walking by. I moved over to another window to see. That's when I saw a man walking to the back side of the house. He was wearing a sort of construction vest and had a hat on. I realized that it must be the meter reader. I remember that they came around every so often to our house. I calmed down almost immediately. I had been a little worried seeing a guy walking into our backyard. He went to the very back side of our house and near one of the basement windows. I went back to finding some food in the kitchen. After I was in the kitchen for a good 5 minutes though, I looked over and noticed that the guy was still there. Usually, they would come and go really quick and only be there for like a minute at most. I went back into the living room to go back on the computer, but a short time later, I just had the feeling that I should get up and make sure that the man was now gone. Maybe it was because I was home alone and a kid, so I was a little bit paranoid. I carefully walked back over to the window and could see that the man was actually still there. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't tell exactly what he was doing because I could only see part of him from the angle that I was at, which was higher up than he was. He seemed to be doing something and was near the basement window, but I couldn't tell what exactly he was doing. I thought about going downstairs and looking out of that window, but I knew that the man would see me right away if I did. I went to walk over to another window upstairs, which would have a better angle, but I had to be careful so the guy wouldn't see me. Unfortunately, I really messed up. As I was walking over, I accidentally hit a can that was near the edge of a counter in the kitchen. I knocked it over and it fell onto the ground. This made a loud noise, and the next thing I knew, I saw the man quickly walking away. He moved back to the side of the house. I moved to the front of the house, and I watched the man casually walking down the street until I could no longer see him. I felt like he was really suspicious. I questioned whether he was even a meter reader or not. Why would he leave so suddenly like that? For the most part, though, I was just happy that he was now gone. I went back to the computer. I stayed there for the most part until my brother and parents came back home. When they did, I didn't even think to tell them about the guy that had been there. I thought he was gone for good. My brother's bedroom, as well as mine, happened to be in the basement, and my parents' bedroom was upstairs. Because it was summertime, we would stay up pretty much as late as we wanted. I remember that on this night, my parents went to bed, and my brother went down to his bedroom. I stayed up and was on the computer. All of the lights in the house were off, except for a small lamp in the living room near me. I stayed up on the computer until I got really tired, which was probably at about 1 a.m. Then, I turned off the lamp and went downstairs to go to bed. When I got downstairs, I had to walk past a little living room that was in the basement in order to get to my bedroom. As I was walking past, I happened to see something in the window. The man was back. I could only see a figure of a man, but I could guess who it was. This was the same window that he had been at earlier in the day. I then heard noises coming from the window, as if it was going to come open. I was suddenly really afraid. It was really dark down there, and I hit the light switch, which I happened to be really close to. When this happened, it lit up the whole room, and I could no longer see the man very well. I heard some noise from right outside the window, though, and then it sounded like he was running away. I went running as well, but back upstairs into my parents' bedroom. I knocked on their door and yelled for them to wake up. About a minute later, my dad came out asking what was going on. By the time I explained it all, the man was long gone. My dad went out and inspected the house all around, though. He was able to find that the back window the man kept messing with had quite a bit of damage. It had almost came off. It was like the man had been trying to remove the window and get inside the house, and he was really close to succeeding. After that night, though, the man never came back. I remember being really scared for a while that he would, and I slept upstairs on the couch because I felt safer there. Luckily, he never did.
This happened back when I was in college. During the summers, I lived back home with my parents at their house. I had almost the entire basement to myself, and they wouldn't really go down there much when I was gone. There was a big TV down there, and then my bedroom and a bathroom. It was really nice to have all of that space. I drove home from school after I had finished my finals and packed up my stuff from the college dorm. When I arrived back at my parents' house, they happened to be gone. They told me that they would be back in a few hours and were out for the night. That meant that I would be home alone. I did have my own house key, so when I got back, I was able to get inside. I spent the first bit of time unpacking a bunch of my stuff and putting some of it into storage and in the basement. I went down into the basement and I stayed in the main room and was using the TV for a while. It was then that I thought I heard a noise coming from inside of my bedroom. I hadn't been in there yet, and the door was closed. I didn't know what it could be, but I wasn't scared or anything like that. I casually got up and walked over to the door. Then I opened it. When I did, I heard the sound of my closet door closing. It was kind of out of my view, and when I looked over to it, the door was completely shut. Suddenly, I was now a little bit concerned about what this could be. Only a person could close the door like that, and I was home all by myself. I thought about going over and opening the closet door, but decided not to. I turned around and walked out of the room instead. I no longer wanted to be downstairs, and I went up into the living room upstairs. As I was up there, probably 30 minutes went by without anything happening. I was just watching TV and relaxing on the couch. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of somebody walking up the staircase. I knew that it wasn't my parents because they weren't home yet. I looked over to the stairs. The person was not in my view yet, but I kept looking. Then I saw a man start to come into view, and he was walking up the stairs towards me. This guy looked a little bit older than me, but had a beard and long hair. He looked like he had to be on some kind of drug or something. As he approached me, I quickly got up. I backed away and asked him who he was. The guy didn't say anything. He just kept walking closer. I told him that he needed to get out of here or I was going to call the police. The guy didn't say anything though and kept getting closer and closer to me. I was backed up as much as I could and would soon reach the wall. He continued to approach me. I then ran to the side and was now in the back corner of the house. The guy kept coming near me. Then he started to charge at me. This guy had to be insane. When he lunged for me, I jumped out of the way. He caught part of my leg and I fell to the ground. The man fell also. I was able to get to my feet before he did, and I ran to the staircase and went down the stairs as quickly as possible. When I made it to the bottom, I opened the door and left the house. The crazy guy did the same, but a little bit after me. I went sprinting down the neighborhood street, yelling at the guy to get away from me. He stopped chasing me eventually, and kind of wandered off into somebody else's yard. Then I was finally able to compose myself and call 911. When the police got to my street, I didn't know where the guy was anymore. I had walked back to our house and was standing in the front yard. The guy ended up being found about 15 minutes later. I guess he went and hid in somebody's backyard, and they saw him and called the police. The police happened to already be there a few houses away at my place and picked the guy up. I'm really not sure how he got into my parents' house or how long he had been there. I'm guessing he got in shortly after they left. I do know that he was there the entire time that I was, and that really gives me the creeps. I live by myself in an apartment. It's really close to downtown of a big city. There are lots of people that live in the area, but I've never witnessed anything that crazy until recently. A few months ago was when this story took place. It had been another long day of work and I had just gotten home. I worked a long shift and I love my job, but it can be very tiring. After walking home, I got into my apartment building and up to the 4th floor where my place was. I got inside, closed the door and locked it like I always did, and then headed to take a shower, put on some comfortable clothes, and go to bed. I had made it about 10 feet away from my front door when I heard the knob turning. Somebody was trying to get in. This was strange and something that had never happened before. I stopped in my tracks and then moved over to the door and looked out the peephole into the hallway. Nobody was there. Whoever had tried to enter, I guess, had just left. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe it wasn't. Either way, I was really tired and just wanted to take a shower and go to bed. About 20 minutes later, I was in bed and just browsing on my phone before I fell asleep. During this time, all of my lights in my apartment were out, and it was completely silent inside. That's when I heard my doorknob being turned again. But not once this time, multiple times. There was no knock, but I knew whoever had tried to enter before was likely back. I couldn't sleep with the thought of someone trying to enter my apartment. I got up from bed and tiptoed over to the door to look out once again. This time, I saw somebody. A man stood there just outside of my front door. I kind of freaked out when I saw him. He looked kind of sketchy, wasn't well dressed or put together. He was just standing there and looking at my door. Then he tried opening it another time. he sort of looked around the hallway and then back to my door. I kept watching, and he stood there for maybe another minute. Then, he turned to the right and started walking away down the hallway. The hallway led straight down to the stairs and elevator area. I waited to make sure that the guy was leaving, and about 10 seconds after he left my view, I quietly opened my door. I snuck out into the hallway and took a few steps out to make sure that the guy was going to leave. Hopefully that would give me peace of mind and I could go back to bed. At first, I saw the man a good distance down the hallway, walking away still. He was almost at the end of the hall. But then, he stopped and turned around and faced me. He started heading towards me, and his walk quickly turned into a sprint. I hurried as quickly as I could to get back inside my apartment and close the door. As soon as I made it inside, I slammed it and locked it. The man reached the door probably a second later and tried opening it again. After he realized it wouldn't open, he pounded on the door a few times. I yelled to the other side, asking what the man wanted. He did not answer me, but kept standing there. I watched still from the people inside. He tried opening the door again. I yelled that I was calling the police, and then the man finally turned and left. Still, I wasn't convinced that he was actually gone. I waited around for about an hour, checking out my door every so often. He didn't return though. Finally, I was able to go back to bed. I haven't seen the man since that night, and looking back, I think he probably followed me home on the street. I might have even let him into my apartment building without knowing. I didn't really pay that good of attention as I walked home, but now I do. I remember that last year I got home after a trip being out of town for a few days. It was a work thing, and I have my own little apartment in the city. After getting back, it was nighttime, and I got into my place and started to unpack. I have just one bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, and 1.5 bathrooms. Each room has a decent amount of space. I unpacked a few things and then went into my bedroom to continue. Now, most of the time, my apartment is pretty neat, but I had left for my trip in a bit of a rush. I had been meaning to wash one of the comforters from my bed, and it was lying on the ground in the corner of my bedroom. The other one was on my bed, I just hadn't washed the one yet. As I was in my bedroom, I was taking clothes out of my suitcase. I was putting some in the hamper and some back in my drawers. As I was doing this, I was sure I saw the blanket on the ground in the corner move. I wasn't looking directly at it when it happened, and I stopped what I was doing and focused my attention to it. I was sure that I saw it moving ever so slightly. This was really weird. There was no way that it could move like that on its own. I stared at it for probably a minute or so, and it was completely still. I then got up and left the room. I was kind of in disbelief. I paced around in my living room for a few moments. Then I walked back inside my room and looked at the blanket in the corner again. It was completely still and didn't move for the few moments that I looked at it. I left my bedroom again. I was wondering if I had gone crazy. I walked over into my half bathroom, which was at the opposite side of my apartment and near the front door. When I got inside, I shut the door and splashed some cold water on my face. Maybe I was suffering from a lack of sleep. But as I was there in the bathroom, I heard footsteps coming from my bedroom area. I quickly locked the bathroom door. The footsteps went all the way to right outside of the bathroom door. Then somebody tried opening it. I was so glad that I had locked it. After the person tried opening the door, I then heard my front door to the apartment open and then shut. Then things were silent. I was still freaking out. I had no idea what was happening. After a few minutes, I left the bathroom and locked the front door to my apartment. I then searched all around to make sure that whoever had been there had actually left. Thankfully, nobody else was inside. I did see that the blanket that had been in the corner of my bedroom on the floor was no longer in the corner the way that it had been. It was spread out in the middle of the room. This happened back when I was younger. I was probably like 10 or 12 years old, and I remember that I was just old enough that my parents trusted me on my own, and I didn't need a babysitter. My parents would go places occasionally, and I was an only child, so I was excited to be trusted alone in the house. This was the very first time that I was left home alone. As a kid, really all I wanted to do was play video games, and when my parents were gone, I had plans to do just that. I remember that it was a Friday night, and my parents left at about 6 o'clock. I was inside my bedroom playing video games on the TV that I had in there for a while. At probably 7:30 p.m., I went downstairs and got some food from what my parents had left out for me. Then I went back up to my room to keep playing. I was eating and playing video games for the next 30 minutes or so. It It was probably about 8 o'clock when I heard a noise coming from downstairs. The noise was the sound of our house back door opening. Right away, I knew this was bad. I knew that my parents wouldn't come in through that way, and they wouldn't be home anytime soon either. The only thing I could think of was that somebody was here who was not supposed to be. My bedroom was upstairs, and my door was open a little. The first thing that I did was run over to the door and close it as quickly but as quietly as I could. Then I looked around my room for a place to hide. All the meanwhile, I heard footsteps roaming around downstairs. I finally decided that I was going to hide in my closet. It was really small, but I could just barely fit inside of it. I couldn't hear as well anymore, but did hear footsteps moving around downstairs. Soon, though, I stopped hearing them. I stayed hidden in the closet, though. This was not before cell phones, but I didn't have one. We had a home phone that I could use to call my parents if I needed anything, but that was downstairs. I didn't want to leave my bedroom or even leave my closet. Things were very quiet for probably a good 30 minutes or so. I was just starting to calm down and feel a little bit better when I heard footsteps coming up the staircase. Now I was anything but calm. I was terrified. The footsteps got to the top of the staircase and were now in the upstairs hallway. My room was the third door on the left from there. I heard whoever was there slowly walking down the hallway. They seemed to go inside one of the first rooms. About a minute later, they came out. Then they got closer and closer to my room. They stopped right outside of it, and then the door opened. By this time, I was freaking out inside, but trying to keep my composure. I knew that I couldn't make a sound, or whoever was in there would hear me. I was out of sight, and unless they opened my closet, I wouldn't be seen. I did my best to stay silent. After the door opened, footsteps entered the room. They didn't get too far inside, maybe like a couple of feet. They stood there for an uncomfortable amount of time. I really don't know how long it was, maybe 30 seconds. It felt like a lot longer than that though. Then I heard another sound. It was the sound of our garage door opening. My parents were home. The footsteps left the room and quickly went back downstairs. I heard them moving around the first floor of the house. Soon after, the back door to the house opened and shut again. Then I heard the sound of the door from the garage open and my parents' voices coming from downstairs. I left my closet and saw that my bedroom door was left wide open. I ran out of my room and sprinted down the stairs to my parents. They asked me how I did being left alone for the first time. I started crying and told them everything. We ended up calling the police, and my parents realized that the back door had been left unlocked. It was a door that was easy to forget to lock. Our neighborhood wasn't known to have much crime, so you wouldn't think leaving the back door unlocked here and there was a big deal. After this, though, we were always sure to lock it. I'm not sure if the police ever found out who did it. I couldn't give them a description at all, and I never saw who it was. I didn't stay home alone for a while after that. Luckily, nothing of the sort has happened to me since. A couple of years ago, I lived alone in an apartment. It was on the 4th floor of the building, which was a pretty typical apartment building. I think it had 5 floors total and was relatively old and close to the city. My apartment was 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom with a kitchen and a living room. It wasn't that big, but had everything that I needed for just me living there. I guess after about 3 or 4 months of being there, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I remembered that immediately I heard some sounds, as if there was somebody else in my apartment. I thought I heard footsteps of somebody walking near the front door. I sat up and turned my light on. The noises seemed to stop after that. I sat in bed for a while before I felt brave enough to get up and open my bedroom door. Eventually, I did. I looked out into my dark living room and kitchen. I turned on the lights, and everything seemed normal. I must have been hearing things or something. After looking around my apartment and double-checking to see that the door was still locked, I went back to bed. Nothing else that was strange happened for like a month. But then, almost the exact same thing happened again. I was woken up in the night, hearing noises inside my apartment. This time, I sat laying in bed trying hard to listen to the noises to detect what exactly they were. They really weren't that loud, but it did sound like somebody was walking inside my apartment. All of my lights were off inside, including my bedroom, so I really couldn't see a thing. I thought about reaching over and turning on the light, but I was just really focused on listening to the noise. Was there somehow a chance that I was hearing something other than what it sounded like? Maybe I was hearing someone on the floor above or below my apartment, or maybe I was just hearing random noises that buildings make. But no, this was for sure the sound of somebody walking around in my apartment, and now it sounded like the footsteps were right outside my bedroom door. Then I heard the door handle start to turn, and I heard the creak of my door opening. I thought my heart would pound right out of my chest. I got really hot and sweaty. And as the door opened, I looked right at the opening. The door got about halfway open, and I saw the figure of a man standing in the doorway. He appeared to be looking right at me, but I couldn't tell any details about him at all in the dark, just that he was there. I was sitting up in my bed, and he stood there for maybe 10 seconds before I couldn't help but let out a scream. When I did, the man backed up and shut the door. I was screaming like a crazy person for like a minute straight. By the time I composed myself, I grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived at my apartment a while later, and when they looked around, whoever had been in my apartment was now gone. There was no evidence left behind, and there were no signs of forced entry. My door was still even locked. None of my windows were open or anything like that either. I was so puzzled by this. I knew what I had seen though, but all I was able to give was the description of a man that was sort of tall. I couldn't tell anything about him really. It was like 2 a.m. and the police left. I barely slept at all for the rest of the night. I didn't know what to do. I worried that I was going insane. Over the next few days, things got a little bit back to normal, but I was worried for something like this to happen again. And then, an idea came to me. I went to the store, and I got 2 things. The first was a lock for my bedroom door, and the second was a motion-detecting security camera. It was a little bit expensive, but I needed answers. I set it up inside my apartment, facing the door and most of the kitchen area where I had heard the footsteps. I hid the camera as best as I could on my bookshelf. Then, I set up a lock on my bedroom door so I would feel more safe as I slept. I set the camera every night before bed, but for the longest time, nothing happened. Of course, I was happy about this, but at the same time, I was always a little bit worried about whoever it was returning. I would say it was like maybe 3 weeks since the last incident, and then something happened. I was once again woken up to hear what sounded like the door to my apartment opening. I heard footsteps once again, but this time, they were really fast. They went straight towards my bedroom door and were much louder than before. Whoever it was tried opening the door, but this time it was locked. They tried violently and quickly turning the knob several more times before stopping. I screamed that I was calling the police. This caused whoever was there to walk back and straight out my door. As soon as they left, I got up and ran out to get my camera. I went back into my bedroom and locked the door again. From there, I watched the footage. It had recorded the entire thing. When I played the video, I saw a man walking right into my apartment as if the front door wasn't even locked. When the man walked in, I recognized him. It was my next-door neighbor. I didn't know the guy well at all, but I knew that his name was Jim. I had only briefly said hi to him one time in the hallway. After seeing this, I called the police again. They arrived and had remembered me from before. This time, I had evidence to show them. When they watched the video, they went next door and confronted Jim. At first, he was pretending to be asleep and that the police woke him up, but when he was told there was video evidence, he seemed to get angry. He flat out claimed it wasn't him and denied it, but then later changed his story that he must have been sleepwalking. But the police weren't buying it and took him in. I'm really glad they did, because he later admitted to being awake the whole time, and the way he was able to get inside my apartment was because he somehow had a spare key. How he had an extra key to my place, I'm not sure, but I'm glad I don't have to worry about him anymore. This story happened when I was much younger. I was in high school at the time, and a freshman. This was during the fall semester. I had just gotten home from school and was all by myself. I have a brother, but he played football and would get home much later. I would ride the bus home from school and get back at like 3 p.m. Usually, after I got home, I had about 2 hours or so until my parents would get back from work. In that time, I usually just played video games or watched TV. Every now and then did homework. On this day, I made some pizza rolls and then went upstairs into my room to play some video games. I was up there for probably like an hour playing. I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing coming from downstairs. I knew it was more than likely either my mom or my dad getting home, and I paused the game and went downstairs to say hi and ask what we were having for dinner. I went down the hall outside my bedroom and started to walk down the stairs. I got maybe like 3 steps down when I noticed something. There was someone in the house, but it wasn't either of my parents. It was just some guy. He had sort of long, curly, light brown hair and was walking through the end of the kitchen into the dining room. I paused and immediately turned around. Thankfully, the man hadn't seen me. I ran back into my bedroom and quietly shut the door. Once I was inside, I started panicking. I was pretty scared and had no idea what to do. Back then, I didn't have a cell phone, and the only phones that we did have were downstairs in the kitchen and in the living room. I was definitely not going down there. I was afraid whoever the guy was going to come upstairs. I went around my bedroom and took everything big I could find and stacked it up against my bedroom door. Then I went and hid in the back corner of the room. I couldn't really hear anything, so I had no idea where the guy was downstairs. I got a blanket and covered myself up because I was so scared. I waited there in my room for what felt like forever. Eventually, I heard the sound of one of my parents coming home. I got up and went over to my door to listen. As I listened, I heard the front door to the house opening and then heard my dad's voice. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, so I moved all the junk away from my front door and went out. I saw that my dad was standing in the kitchen and most of the downstairs was all messed up. He saw me and asked what was going on. I ran downstairs and told him about what had happened. We both left the house and called the police. When they got there and searched the house, whoever had been inside was gone. The guy that I had seen had been able to enter the house because I guess I forgot to lock the front door when I got home. The guy went inside and basically just messed the place up and didn't really steal anything. He then left before my dad got home. I felt bad for being sort of responsible, but at the same time, my parents weren't mad at me and were just glad that I was okay. When I was back in high school, I lived at home with my mom. It was just her and I after my parents got divorced when I was younger. My mom had a pretty good job and occasionally would get to travel. I remember in the summer she brought me with her to New York once and another time to Chicago. However, during the school year, I wouldn't be able to go with and had to stay home because of school. During my sophomore year of high school, my mom had to go to Dallas for a couple of days and I would be staying home by myself. She left me with money for food and gave me some instructions on how to take care of several of our houseplants. She left, and the first few days went by very smoothly. Then, it got to Friday night. I thought it was kind of cool to be on my own and have an entire house to myself. On Friday night, I stayed up pretty late. It was probably like midnight, and I was up in my bedroom watching a movie. That's when I heard a knock at the front door. I was terrified. Who on earth would be knocking on the door at midnight? It was rare that people even knocked on our door during the day. There was no way I was going to answer it, and I hoped that it would just go away. Whoever was there knocked maybe 2 more times, and then it stopped. After a few moments, I was confident that whoever was there and had been knocking had left, and I unpaused the movie. Then, probably 30 minutes later, there was knocking again. It was almost exactly the same as before. My heart sank as soon as I heard it. They knocked, and then waited about 10 seconds, and knocked again. It sounded like they weren't going to go away unless I answered the door. However, I had no plans on doing so. I quietly left my bedroom and walked over to my mom's office on the upstairs. This is a room that actually had a view of outside near the front door where whoever was knocking was. I crawled to the window and then peeked outside of it. I saw some guy standing there, and I didn't recognize him. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt with the hood up, and I watched him knock on the door. I ducked down again, careful so that he didn't see me. He kept on knocking, though. I just wanted the guy to go away. Who was he, and what did he want? I was sitting there on the floor of my mom's office, thinking about the possibilities. I even considered answering the door, even though I didn't want to. Then, the knocking stopped. After not hearing it for a few seconds, I was hoping that the guy had gone away. I wanted to look and see if he was gone, but I was terrified. After a minute or so, I mustered up the courage to look out of the window again. This time, I saw the man was still there, and he was looking up right at me. I jumped back and ran all the way back to my bedroom. Shortly after getting back inside, I heard the sound of glass breaking coming from somewhere downstairs. I will never forget it. It was probably the most scared I've ever been. I closed my bedroom door, but sadly, it didn't have a lock on it. I had no idea what to do. As I was inside, I heard the guy walking downstairs. It seemed like he went straight towards the stairs and then started walking up. I began to panic. I had no idea what I was going to do. The only thing that came to my mind was to climb out of my bedroom window, but it was pretty high up from the ground. I went over and opened it. There was a tree close by with a large branch, and as I looked at it, I heard the man's footsteps coming down the hallway and headed right towards my bedroom. I took a deep breath and then climbed out my window onto the tree branch. I was able to sort of climb down it, and it wiggled a little, but overall seemed stable. As I was going down, I saw out of the corner of my eye my bedroom door opening. I went faster, and when I was close enough, jumped down. I got to the ground, and I was all right. Whoever the guy was now in my bedroom though, and I sprinted as quickly as I could down the street. I found a neighbor's house that my mom and I knew pretty well, and banged on their door like crazy. Thankfully, they were still up and answered the door. They called the police for me and let me stay in their house. When the police got there, the man was gone though. I called my mom as well, who came back home the next day. After that experience, I didn't want to be home alone for a long time. This happened just about a week ago. I'm 20 years old, and I live with my parents during the summer. However, they went out of town for some of their friends' wedding, and I wasn't invited. This was fine with me though, because I didn't really know the people anyways, and it's kind of fun to have the whole house to myself. We have a split-level house, and my bedroom is at the front end of it. But on Friday night, I stayed up really late watching a movie in the living room. I like that TV better because it's much bigger than mine. The couch in the living room is also super comfortable, so I just decided to sleep there for the night. Anyways, I woke up Saturday morning, and it was still super dark in the house. In the living room, we had a sliding glass door that connects to the deck in the back. The blinds were covering most of it, and that's the main source of light, but there was maybe a 5-foot gap to look out, and I saw that it was raining. I then looked at the clock, and it was almost 9:30 a.m. I was just sitting there on the couch and turned on the TV, when all of a sudden I heard 2 knocks at the front door. They weren't really hard knocks, sort of light, and immediately my heart started pounding. I know it's not a big deal just to get knocks on the door, but we lived towards the end of a dead-end road, and our neighborhood was very quiet. It wasn't very big, and it was extremely rare for anybody to knock on our doors for any reason. Maybe it's also because I'm a shy person, but it made me really nervous for some reason. From where I was sitting on the couch, I was just barely around the corner, and I couldn't see the front door. And whoever was at the front door probably couldn't see me. At least I was hoping they couldn't see me. I was wondering who it could possibly be, especially in the middle of pouring rain. Then I remembered something. I had ordered an Amazon package and was expecting it today. Suddenly, I felt so much better and started to relax. I opened up my Amazon app on my phone and clicked on my orders, expecting to see that it was delivered. But when I looked, it said it wouldn't arrive until 5 p.m. that day. Suddenly, I went back to being super nervous. I decided to carefully look out and see if anyone was at the door. It had now been maybe a minute or two since they had originally knocked, and they hadn't knocked again since. I slowly moved to look out the window, and when I did, I saw that nobody was there now. This made me feel a little better now that they were gone, but right at that moment, I heard the noise of somebody walking up the stairs of our back deck. I couldn't see because of the blinds covering most of the sliding glass door, but I then heard footsteps on the deck. I started shaking, and the next thing I knew, I saw a man appear in the opening of the sliding glass door where you could see outside. He was staring right at me, but had no expression on his face. He was bald and wore a black jacket and black pants. The guy then tried sliding the door open. Thankfully, it was locked, but I knew if he really wanted to, he could probably break the glass between us. I ran away into the bathroom that was just down the hall. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was doing here. I had been right to be so nervous about this for seemingly no reason. As I closed the bathroom door and locked it, that's when I heard the first loud bang against the window, as if he was going to try to break it. I knew I needed to call the police, but then I realized that I didn't have my phone. I had left it back out in the living room. I heard another loud bang from the window, but I didn't hear glass breaking. I knew it was a risk, but I opened the door back up and ran out to the living room couch. I looked around frantically and finally saw my phone. Then I made another mad dash for the bathroom. As I was, another bang came from the window. I looked back at the man as I ran. I saw he had been kicking at the glass and trying to break it. I got back into the bathroom and locked the door again. Then I called 911 on my phone. As soon as the operator answered, I told them everything. They told me to slow down and repeat what was going on. That's when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I repeated what was happening as best as I could, and just after that, I heard the sound of the man starting to walk inside the house. He was walking straight for the bathroom that I was in. When he got to the doorway, he tried the door, and it wouldn't open because it was locked. I backed away from it and went into the shower. The 911 operator said that they would stay on the line with me, which made me feel a little bit better because I was terrified. The man then started to bang on the bathroom door, and my phone suddenly went silent. I looked at it and saw that it had died. I hadn't plugged it in the previous night. I figured the man was kicking on the door the same way he had been kicking on the sliding glass door, and I knew he would probably break this as well. I heard him walk away for a minute and then go down the stairs that we had. He was gone for maybe a full minute, and then I heard him return. There was another loud bang against the bathroom door, but this one sounded much harder. I think he had found one of the baseball bats we had in our house or something. This made me even more terrified than I already was. I grabbed the towels we had in the bathroom and covered myself. I then went into the small bathroom closet we had and closed that door. I just barely fit in there, but I had to do what I could. The guy hit at the door a few more times, and it really sounded like he was breaking it now, but that noise was interrupted by another one. It was the noise of a loud knock on the front door. I could barely hear someone shouting police. I hoped they would be able to get inside fast, and just after that, I heard the man walking away towards the back of the house where he had gotten in. I stayed hidden, and a short time later, I heard a bunch of shouting. Eventually, I heard someone yelling, "Put it down." When I finally heard the voice of multiple officers inside my house, I finally came out of the bathroom. They had literally gotten there just in the nick of time, and the man had been caught. I'm really lucky how fast the police were to arrive that day. This was very recent, and I'm still a little shook up about it, but I'm just happy to be okay.